In this video, we're looking at the first half of lesson 0.5, midpoint and distance. The essential question that we're going to answer is how can you find the midpoint and length of a line segment in the coordinate plane? In day one, we're going to focus on finding the midpoint using the midpoint formula. Before we get started with that, there's a few vocabulary words to cover. The first is called perpendicular lines. You've probably heard this word before. Remember, two lines are perpendicular when they intersect to form a right angle. So let's go ahead and draw two lines, and you want them to intersect to form a right angle. Those two lines are perpendicular. A perpendicular bisector is a line, segment, or ray that is perpendicular to a segment at its midpoint and cuts it in half. So for perpendicular bisector, we need a few different criteria to be met. First, we need a segment. So notice how I'm going to draw endpoints on it. So no arrowheads. And then we need the midpoint of the segment. So I'm going to call the midpoint of this segment M, and let's just call it segment AB. Now that I've found the midpoint, to make a perpendicular bisector, we can have a line, a segment, or a ray that goes through that midpoint. For the first picture, I'm going to go ahead and draw a ray. As long as it goes through that midpoint and it makes a 90-degree angle with the segment, that is what makes it a perpendicular bisector. So here you can see the perpendicular bisector. Let's put a letter on this. Let's call it ray MC. Now, another example of a perpendicular bisector would be if you have a line or a segment. So again, I'm going to draw a segment here. For switching the letters, let's call this segment DE. And the midpoint, again, I'm going to call it M for midpoint. And then this time I'm creating a line. And as long as that line is perpendicular, that makes it a perpendicular bisector. So we know the midpoint is the point that divides the segment into two congruent segments. But if you want to calculate the midpoint of a line segment AB, whose points are in the coordinate plane, there's a nice formula we can use for that. And that formula you're going to need throughout this lesson and for your assignment. So make sure to pause the video and get the midpoint formula written down. The coordinates of midpoint M of segment AB with endpoints A at x1, y1 and B at x1, y2 are the following. For the x coordinate of the midpoint, we add the two x coordinates together, so x1 plus x2 divided by 2. For the y coordinate of the midpoint, you add the two y coordinates together, so y1 plus y2 divided by 2. So once you get going on these, it really is pretty simple to find a midpoint. Just let the first point be x1, y1, and let the second point be x2, y2. Then if we go ahead and we use the formula above, just add the two x coordinates together. So my midpoint M is 8 plus negative 6. So I'm taking the two x coordinates, adding them up, dividing by 2. And then do the same with the y coordinates. So 9 plus negative 3 divided by 2. Make sure to simplify the top of the fraction, the numerator, before you divide by 2. So here, 8 plus negative 6 would be 2. So we have 2 divided by 2. And then 9 plus negative 3 is positive 6. So we have 6 divided by 2. Then to get our final answer, divide by 2. So 2 divided by 2 is 1. And 6 divided by 2 is 3. So point M, the midpoint of segment AB, would be located at 1, 3. Here's a try now that's exactly like the previous question. We're going to find the coordinates of the midpoint of xy with endpoints x 2, negative 5 and y 6, 13. Go ahead and try this problem on your own. Please pause the video right now. Pause the video. All right, so you should be getting a midpoint at 4, 4. This next example is a bit more challenging. This time, we have a segment with an endpoint at 2, 6, and the midpoint is at 5, 12. We want to find the other endpoints. So notice 5, 12 is the the midpoint, not an endpoint. So with this, you kind of need to do the formula in reverse. I'm going to show you two different ways to do this same problem. First thing, no matter what method you use, would be to just draw yourself a picture. let's call the segment AB. And again, we know that the midpoint M is at 512. Now we also know that A is at 26. And we're looking for what's B. So one way you can do this is you can do the formula in reverse. So let's call B, let's just call that X and Y because we don't know what the coordinates are. And then we can go ahead and take those numbers and plug them into our midpoint formula. So here's our formula, and we do have the X1 and the Y1 already. So 2, 6. Let's go ahead and sub that in. 2 plus, we don't know what X2 is, it's just the X in my picture. So 2 plus X divided by 2, and then do the same with your Y1. So 6 plus Y divided by 2. But this time, we do know that the midpoint has to be 512. So what we can do is we can break this up into two pieces. We can go 2 plus X divided by 2, set that equal to 5. And to solve for X, let's just get rid of this divide by 2. To get rid of the divide by 2, just take both sides and multiply them by 2. Now 2 plus X will equal 10, and we can solve for X by subtracting 2. So my X coordinate is 8. You can do the same thing with the Y coordinate. So 6 plus Y divided by 2 has to equal 12. Again, get rid of the divide by 2 by multiplying each side by 2. So 6 plus Y equal 24. Subtract your 6 on both sides, and we end up with Y equal 18. So the other endpoint must have the coordinates at 8 for X, 18 for Y. So your answer would be the ordered pair 8, 18. You can always check your answer now by subbing 8 and 18 in for X2, Y2 into the midpoint formula and verify that you end up back at the midpoint 512. So that was kind of the algebra way to do it. There is another way though that you can do it that's a little bit more visual. So if you're more of a visual learner, you might like the second method better. So I'm going to zoom out here. And the second method is just to look for a pattern. You need the same picture that we drew at the beginning. So again, I'm just going to draw my segment. And I know that one of the endpoints is at 2, 6. And I know that my midpoint is at 512. We don't know what the other midpoint is, but what we could do to find it would be to look for a pattern. Remember, the midpoint is halfway. So notice how to get from 2 to 5, you just add 3. Now to get the rest of the way, we could do 5, add 3, and that would give us the 8. Let's do that with the Y's. To get from 6 to 12, you add 6. So to get from 12 to the next Y coordinate, we also have to add 6, and 12 plus 6 is 18. So notice how we get the same answer, 8, 18. So you can do the problem either of those two ways. You'll end up with the same answer. Pick the method that you like the best. For the try now, this problem is exactly like the problem that we did in the previous example. So I'd like you to try this problem on your own. Go ahead and pause the video, give it a try, and then when you hit play again, I'll have the solution and we'll talk it through. Ready? Pause the video. All right, so you should have gotten the other endpoint to be at 4, negative 11. I showed in the work here, I showed two methods. The first method was using the formula in reverse. So 2 plus X divided by 2 has to equal the X coordinate of the midpoint, which is 3. And the Y's, 3 plus Y divided by 2 has to equal the Y coordinate, which was negative 4. You would end up with 4 for your X coordinate, negative 11 for your Y coordinate. If you're more of a visual person, the second method is down below. You have to find the pattern, I guess, for the X's. 2 to 3 goes up by 1, so I added 1. And then I did that same pattern to get from the midpoint to the next X. You go 3 plus 1, that's 4. For the Y coordinate, we do go down. So from 3 to negative 4, you need to add negative 7, or just subtract 7. Then follow that same pattern from the y-coordinate of the midpoint to the y-coordinate of the other endpoint. We also add -7, -4, and -7 add to -11. So your second endpoint would be 4, -11. So you're going to see problems of both types in your homework practice. Some problems where you'll be given the endpoints and asked to find the midpoint. There you can go straight to the formula. If you're given one endpoint and the midpoint, you can solve it using the formula in reverse, like I did for the method on top, or you can draw a picture and find the pattern and use that visual method like I did in the lower half of the page here. So that's it for this lesson video. Thanks for watching. Bye.